everyone. I am Nami Melumad, and I am a composer. I currently write music for Star Trek Prodigy and Star Trek Strange New Worlds. Another recent project I worked on is Netflix's The Woman in the House Across the Street from the Girl in the Window, starring Kristen, and the Disney short Far from the Tree. So yeah, I'm excited to be here, and thank you for having me.
Okay, I'm going to go into my first question here. Growing up, what did you want to be?
I wanted to be a composer. This is a lifelong dream of mine since I was like 14. Because I watched a lot of movies. I was kind of a movie fan. But I also play in the orchestra, like in our school orchestra. I played oboe and flute, and I played piano, and I was really into music, and I loved the combination of both. And so I particularly love scores like Home Alone, the John Williams score, and Lord of the Rings came out at the time, and they had a great score too. So I would play that on piano, and at some point I was doing playing the scores on piano. I was listening to it, and I'm like, what chords did they do? How did they do it? And then I figured out, hey, I can actually play it on piano, so I can also write it, you know. So this is kind of how it all started. Are
Well,
you are you a musician?
yes, I'm a singer-songwriter.
Oh, cool. You play like guitar or piano or both, or
Piano and guitar, yeah.
cool. Yeah, that's awesome.
And you said that you're a huge fan of the bigger orchestral sound. What is it about that sound that drew you in from a young age?
Oh, well, it's very rich. You could do a lot with an orchestra. There's so many colors. Like, you know, you could pick just the woodwinds, and you could pick just the bassoon, just the trombones. There's percussions. Like, there's so many different colors in an orchestra. The range is huge, basically. So I love that. And when you apply this for film, then the film creates all sorts of scenarios for you. It could be drama, it could be horror, it could be tension, it could be comedy. So just the variety and the dynamic you know, cues that you can do even within the same score. Like when I did American Pickle, we had like all this super dramatic stuff, and then we had like super comedy stuff, and then fantasy. Like it all comes together, and you can do a lot with it. And then, you know, you can also add like synths and whatnot, like in our day of age, like you could you know, you're not limited to just orchestra. But yeah, the orchestra, I think is the most fun thing, at least for me. Like that's the thing I enjoy about the most, is just to work with real players who do real music, you know. It's fun.
When did you first start getting into composing?
Yeah, so around 14 years old, I realized, hey, I can actually, you know, I can play on piano. I would play classical piano at that time, but like I realized that everything is made of chords and melodies. So I also wrote some songs at the time, and then you know, having listened to all these scores, and I started analyzing, okay, so Pirates of the Caribbean, how does it go? And then I started playing piano, the Harry Potter theme, like all that stuff. And I'm like, okay, well, you know, if they can do it, I can try. And so I tried like to come up with my own compositions, and I'd be like, what would I do if there was a fourth Lord of the Rings movie? And I would write like what would it sound like? So I still have the demos from back then. That my high school was pretty much me writing writing or, you know, instrumental music, and playing it to everyone who was willing to listen. I have very supportive friends and family, thank God. Yeah, so yeah, and then I went to our in high school, there was like a music section, so I studied chemistry and music, and we had like ensembles, so I could try my compositions on the ensembles. Like I would write stuff, and we get to perform. I got performances. I'm like, oh, this works, this doesn't work, you know. And by the end of high school, I got hired for my first like paid gig, let's say. It was for a theater show for kids. And so it was kind of like film, because you tell the story, there's like a little bit of songs, but you also, you know, you make music for the scenes. So that was like my first real experience with, you know, working with the director and all of that. um And then I went to the military because in Israel you're supposed to do like a 2 year service. So that was a little bit of a break from music. Like I just played and like wrote songs, and it was mainly guitar stuff. And then after that, I went to the academy to learn how to write, and that's where I started really writing for student films and documentaries and whatever I could, find, basically. So yeah, that's how it all started.
Are there any people or mentors who inspired you over the years when it comes to composing?
Yeah, I mean, obviously, like a lot of my teachers were an inspiration. And in Jerusalem, I studied with Joseph Bardanashvili, who's like, he's a really big composer over there, actually worldwide, but like very classical. But he's also doing there's a famous director called Dover Kosashvili, and they have worked together on like all the films that Dover has done. So he had a lot of experience with film scoring, and he kind of pushed me to go out of my comfort zones, which I really appreciate. I also studied with Rafi Kadishan. This is back in Israel still, and he did done a lot of comedies and stuff. So he was also like from that angle very helpful, and we had like really good talks and like kind of more philosophical about like the industry and the world and like music and like how to do your art and what to do if you have a block, like an artist, like what's that called, writer's block,
Yeah.
and stuff like that. So this was in Israel, and then here I worked, I mean, at I went to USC, which has a really cool scoring program. And they also have a mentorship program, and I got selected for that. And my mentor was Tom Newman, who has done like all the films that I, watched as a kid, like Finding Nemo and Wall-E, and like I mean, he's done a bunch of like American Beauty, like this goes back, Road to Perdition, Shawshank Redemption. I mean, I can go on. He's amazing. And so I love that I have an opportunity to like, kind of get his insights on how to do things in Hollywood, because like Hollywood is very different than Tel Aviv. I mean, it's still kind of a very hot weather, but it's a great, it was great insights to hear how he's doing things and just his process. And he invited me for an orchestra session, so that was super inspiring. It was the Finding Dory. And then my other mentor is Michael Giacchino, because I started working with him, and obviously like I learned so much from him all the time. And and that's like, yeah, I mean, I feel like we constantly learn from other, I feel like a lot of people are my mentors even without like, that definition of a mentor.
Yeah.
My showrunners, I mean, in a way they're mentors, because they kind of teach me like, hey, can we do this and that? And I'm like, oh, I should have thought about that. Like, so I pick up from I think everything is kind of a learning experience, even on jobs, that you're paid to do. So it's yeah, it's fun.
What's the biggest challenge of your job versus the biggest reward?
Ooh, oh my God. The biggest challenge I would say is finding balance between like career. I mean, personally for me, between career and personal life, because I'm a very like, I love what I love it. Like I guess it shows. I really like, I'm excited about like music, and I love doing different things, and I love the challenges that the picture presents, like especially with animation, because everything is always, you have these quick transitions and everything has to be like, everything has to fit the picture exactly like on the frame. And so that's obviously challenging, and sometimes the filmmakers will be like, oh, this is good, but we want this and that, and then you go and you do revisions, and it's 2 a.m. and you still do revisions. So there's definitely these challenges, but the thing is, everything takes time. And so for me, I'm like, oh, I'm tempted to take this project and this project, and I'm like, oh, I'm really excited to do that as well. But then I'm like, well, I need my life, like my friends, my family, like I want to date, I want to do other things, I like want to go to the museum or like whatever. Like there's a dino exhibition in LA, like I really want to go. So yeah, so it takes like that. I think that is my biggest challenge. And the biggest reward is like hearing your music live with musicians, like with the orchestra. Is to me, that's like the best. I mean, if I could just move into the studio and live there forever, I probably will. Like, put a bed there and to stay. It's great to be in the studio. Like, I mean, you've probably done that. Like, you recorded any songs or
Yes, yeah.
so you get that, and you understand. Like, it's just there's an addiction to like recording music. It's just so fun.
Mm-hmm.
And work on your stuff, and then get to listen to it, and it's like, ultimately you're happy with it, I hope. So yeah.
What's it like seeing one of your projects like all together at the end? What's that like for
Oh, well, sometimes it's great. Mostly it's great, and you're very proud of it. And it's a work that you've done with other people too. So it's like I feel like it's a group effort that is paying off. Not within the music department, because I write the music, but there's like a lot of people behind me, like a crew that is helping me out, like the orchestrator, music editor, conductor, score mixer, assistants. Like there's like a lot. We're a whole team. And then there's that, but then there's, when you look at the movie, there's like the camera department, there's editorial, there's the sound people who are doing like, they're basically in charge of making the music sound good too. So you have directors and writers and actors, so it all comes together into like a big form of art. So I feel proud of like what we achieve as a team. But then there's also the thing where I'm like, oh, I wish we did that differently, because it always comes back. There's always this moment of like, oh shit, I should have, and no one's ever going to hear it. It's just me being like difficult. So yeah.
Well, walk me through the process of what it is like when you first get involved with a project and like the process of like creating a score.
Okay, so when you first get involved, you mean like when you pitch for things, or when you get hired already?
Either way, you can pick which one.
Okay, so the process of getting, I mean, I think it's going to be interesting for people to actually know how you get hired. So a lot of times they'll reach out to your agency and ask for like either a reel from you specifically, or just a general, submissions for a certain project. And they'll be like, okay, this is our log line for the story. This is a comedy, blah, blah, blah. This is a director. This is the actors. These are the producers attached. And this is the log line. We're looking for this kind of music. Like it could be orchestral, it could be synth. Sometimes there are a lot of big words there on this description. And then you have to come up, like you as a composer, send out between 15 to 20 tracks that are aligned with what they're looking for. And then if they like your music, they call you back for an interview or for a talk, or like stuff like that. And then sometimes there will be like another round of that, or they'll ask you to score a scene, just to see how, it happened to me only one time, but like sometimes it does happen. And then based on like that stuff, or your ideas, they send you sometimes the script, and you have to read it and then come up with ideas, and like what are you going to do with that script. And then you get hired. And once you get hired, you get like you start on on a locked cut usually. And so you have a conversation with the filmmakers about like what they want, and like you do a spotting session where you go through the film or the show, the episode, and you are making it, you're discussing every scene, and trying to understand like where the music starts, where it ends, what's the purpose of it, how dynamic it should be, like where it should stop, or what's the climax, or like how it should change, what point of view are we playing, like is it the character, what do you want the audience to feel or not feel, and so how active do you want the score to be. And sometimes there's a reference music, it's called the temp track. So they're taking tracks from other movies, and they're putting it temporarily into the timeline of the editing. So this kind of helps understand like what the editor thought would be a good idea. And sometimes it's good, and sometimes it's not good. Like composers tend to have different thought about like that. Yeah. I think it is helpful, because it helps you understand if the filmmakers like this kind of thing, or maybe they really don't. So it's kind of like a starting point for the conversation. So yeah, and then you start doing sketches, and probably will do themes or motifs or soundscapes or whatever it is. Some composers tend to do like a suite of themes. I don't like to do like a whole suite. I do like sections. I'm like, okay, this would be the theme for that, this would be the theme for that, and then I send my ideas out. And we kind of work, it's a collaboration, so you get feedback, you do what you think you should do, you send it back, and then you start scoring the actual show. And again, it's like you send for feedback, you get feedback back, and so forth until it's done. And then when it's done, you're recording it, like hopefully if there's budget, then you're recording it with an orchestra, and then that goes to a mix, and then that goes to a final dub of the episode.
And when it comes to certain genres, do you have a certain genre that you most enjoy working on?
I mean, yes and no. I love comedy because that's what I love watching, because it clears my head. I'm like, I don't have to think about stuff. It's fun. I also love animation, but it's not really a genre. It's just like, but a lot of it is comedy or fantasy. I love sci-fi. I watch a lot of sci-fi too, because I love Star Trek, Star Wars. And I love period films. Like, so, I've done several of those in the indie world, not in a studio scenario yet, but I'm looking forward to it.
What would you say is there a most challenging genre for you?
Yeah, horror or action? I don't know, because recently I've done so much action that now I don't feel it's a challenge anymore. Like, I feel I kind of tackled that this year. Starting Strange New Worlds, I didn't realize how much action there's going to be in it, and then all of a sudden I found myself writing action at 2 a.m. At night, and I'm like, oh well, this is actually working out pretty well. So I would say horror a little bit, because I'm not really like watching a lot of that, and so it's hard for me to kind of like figure out what to do there. But I also didn't do that much, so and it's fine. I don't want to,
What's the difference on working on something that's animated versus live action for you?
Okay, well, live action is both are really fun. Animation, it gives a little more room for music, so it feels like the music is more present, like it has a little bit of a bigger job, let's say. So and everything moves way faster. So if for example, on Prodigy I work, and there's like 22 minutes of show, so everything has to move way faster, versus like a live action show, which has like, let's say Star Trek Stranger Worlds has 50 minutes, and you still have score almost wall to wall, but like it doesn't move as quickly. There's a little bit more time, so there's that. And then the other main thing is like the activeness of the score. A lot of times the score would be more active and more colorful and more like big, like more dense, let's say, on animation. So it's fun. Both are really, really, really fun. But yeah. But the thing is also with delivery time, to be honest, like animation has more time to work on, like, because you start early, you start on the animatic level, so it's not final picture or anything. And then you kind of work your way through the cuts. Like every time there's a cut, you kind of update it, or you wait for the final and then it's updated. Versus live action is usually you get like a final cut. So there's less time to work on it. Yeah.
How would you describe yourself as a composer?
I don't know. Dynamic, I would say. Like my range is pretty like all over the place. I write too many notes, probably. This is the note I'm getting all the time. I was like, oh, too many notes. too much. Just think with half your brain. So I'm trying to do that. Like I'm very, I think it comes out in my personality. I'm very energetic. Like I have a lot of like, excitement, and a lot of the music does come out like that, which is good. It's great. But yeah, sometimes I have to tame down a little bit.
What does a typical day of work look like for you?
Oh my God. So 7 a.m. is like coffee, and then 7:30 or 8 is like, depending on like what happened in the world, social media and stuff. And then yeah, I just work the entire day, and probably like late night too. Sometimes until like 1 or 2 a.m. Like it's very intense. When you're on a big project, like we just finished Strange New World. So that was 3 months of craziness because it was just so condensed. Everything was it was a lot to do. So in that case, yeah, you don't have much time. You're like, if you get to see your friends once a week, that's great. That's awesome. And I'm actually working on that, like to be able to actually have my social life, and while I'm doing all these other stuff. So yeah, it's a lot.
I heard you say in a different interview, and I'm not sure if this is still the case, that because of COVID and everything, that orchestras have been like virtual, like over Zoom. How
Yeah.
has that shift been for you?
Yeah, sometimes, I mean, now it's kind of back to like depending on your situation, but like some of the productions are back to normal. So normal in a way that like it's together in the studio and you can go to the studio. So with Strange Worlds, for example, we are recording here at Warner Brothers, and that's in the studio, and you get to go there. You just have to do a COVID test before you go,
Mhm.
like 48 hours in advance, and send the results. And then you have to fill in a questionnaire that everyone is that you're feeling well that day, and submit your vaccine card and stuff. I'm pretty sure this is going to go away pretty soon, because it feels like all the restrictions are kind of slowly not happening anymore. So and then but yeah, so some studios are still the thing is that remote option is actually kind of helpful for some people, because I can now record in England without going there, without having to fly and all of that. So there's that. I record Star Trek Prodigy in Prague, so we're doing that remotely anyway, like regardless of COVID. And it's actually pretty convenient because like you can go to the studio. You don't have to get outside from your house basically. And everything feels like there's softwares that you're able to listen as if you were there. So it's all everything is very like live, like and then they also hear everything that happens in your house. So when my cat decides that he wants to sing and the orchestra hears him, then that happens too. So like the whole orchestra is hearing him. So yeah, I'm a bigger fan of going into the studio. So for example, like when the whole COVID thing started and I was going to go to England and to record at Abbey Road, and then that didn't happen and we had to do it virtually, that was obviously very disappointing, because such a legendary studio and you want to be there. And yeah, I mean, I'm not a big fan of recording without being in the room, but like yeah, I mean, it works. It
Mhm.
has its advantages.
Couple last questions for you before I move into some of your work.
Okay.
What makes someone fun slash easy to work with on a project?
Fun is a person with humor, I guess. And like a lot of humor. I don't know, I mean, just someone is kind of understanding your process, or like adds their creativity, and like is not afraid to go for things that I wouldn't do. Like I want to hire a team that's better than me technically, so that's what I do. My orchestrator, he's better than me. Like I expect him to make it better, and he does. He always does. So does Tracy. Like they always like they're the people I hire, Matt Decker, the music editor, like they're gonna do a job that I cannot do or not have the time to do. And I like when we're doing like a back and forth, because there's a lot of back and forth. And it's like, oh, when Matt creates something and I'm like, oh, I have an idea for that. And so I sent him a very, very little idea on, because I'm not good at Pro Tools. And that's his turf, he's very good at that. So I sent him, a little bit of an idea, and he's like, oh, this is, I know what to do. And then he sends it out and I'm like, oh, this is perfect. This is like, so there's feeding the creativity from both sides. So I think that's very valuable in a team player. And then understanding all our crazy deadlines, and I think we all are kind of workaholics in a way, like, and we love that like adrenaline of like, are we gonna make the deadline or not? Of course we are, but like, that's I think it's there. So sorry, that was fun. What was the other question?
Easy.
Oh, easy. Yeah, easy is when you understand the deadlines and all that stuff. And then yeah, just not being difficult, not having attitude. And I'm trying to surround myself with people who are, like-minded individuals. And kind of like, before I was, full-time composing, I was also helping out on other people's projects, and it was the same. Like, you just want to be there to help out and be part of the team. So I think the understanding that this is a team effort, just like I said at the beginning, like, it's not just me, it's like the whole team. And without the team, I am nothing, without the musicians, there's no music. So, I mean, I honestly, I'm in big, like, thanks for them, because like, I wouldn't be anywhere without them. So they're very important.
Do you have any favorite memories that stick out to you over the years?
Yeah, I mean, when we recorded Pickle, that was probably my favorite scoring session. I don't know, it felt like such a big, I mean, it was my first big Hollywood, let's say, scoring session, in Fox, and we were there for 3 days with a big orchestra. It was 60 or 54 musicians, I think, or 55. But everything was like, it was the perfect movie for me to do. Like, so in terms of score, it had all these Jewish elements, and it was a movie about like this immigrant, like a Jewish immigrant who moves to the US, and he's like, and then he moves in time, like 100 years in time. So all of these elements are kind of like, very much, I identified with that, even though I didn't move in time. Uh, but but yeah, and the orchestra just played so well, and I met also all these incredible people that Michael introduced me to. And I don't know, it was just like such a perfect moment, and I totally cried when I thanked them. It was very emotional. Yeah, and then I just, yeah, I'm still very grateful for all of that. So that was probably my favorite memory. And then when Tom opened the door for the first time, I felt like I was 16. This was like back in 2014, no, 15, when I met him. And that was the first time I go to my mentor, and I felt like a little fangirl. I'm a big fangirl now. Yeah.
Well, I think that's the perfect transition to talking about some of the stuff you've worked on.
Oh, right.
I'm going to start with Star Trek Prodigy. Um, how did you approach it when you first started working on it?
Well, so I had a talk with the filmmakers, obviously, Dan and Kevin and Ben, and they're very music oriented, so that was helpful. Like they understand music, they listen to music all the time when they write, and they listen to good scores, and they made a playlist, so that I could be inspired by the stuff that they had listened to when they were writing the show. So there was a lot of the big scores there that I liked, like, John Williams stuff and Michael Giacchino stuff and Hans Zimmer and James Horner and Jerry Goldsmith. Like there was a lot of, not necessarily Star Trek, but it was like a big sci-fi stuff, but also just big hero stuff and adventure. And so we talked about having like a cinematic approach and like addressing this. This is not just a kids show. This is like, the score needs to be straightforward, cinematic music that would fit in any other film, like in the sense that this is, this obviously we want it to feel like Trek, and we want it to feel like Prodigy, but it needs to feel big and powerful and all of that. So that was, a few things that inspired me, like moving forward, approaching into this. And then the characters and the story, like you have all these very specific personalities for the characters. You have the ship, which is like a whole character on its own, the protostar. You have Janeway, that represents the Federation, or Starfleet. And you slowly introduce this crew of aliens into Star Trek. So this was, we decided that it would be a gradual thing. So, we don't have to start very Trek, and then slowly we'll get into Trek, kind of like how these young aliens are introduced. So that was the basic thoughts. And then kind of like I explained earlier, I did like themes and motifs, and I sent them to the filmmakers for review. and they had feedback, and it was a little bit of back and forth. And then I started writing the actual show.
Well, what was it like creating like it's absolutely amazing. The amazing main title sequence score. I love the main title sequence score.
Well, the main title, I have to say, that's Michael. That's not me. He's great. And then I think we integrate very well in the sense that, like, when I put that theme into the score, it fits very, very good because it doesn't feel like two composers. And that is because we worked together in the past. And then I'm very influenced by what he's done for Star Trek before me, like in 2009, like the movies, the Kelvin timeline. And so I try to integrate that big amazing theme whenever there's like a big moment for our crew in the show, like when they're succeeding in something, and when there's like a big break, or like, oh yeah, they finally were able to fly off that crazy planet where they were held captives, or all sorts of these bigger moments. So yeah, it's about finding the right spots for that, because I love that main title so much. I don't skip it either. Like, a lot of people I saw that people really love it. So I'm like, yeah, me too. I'm happy about it.
What's the process for creating the score for an individual episode?
So you start with like an animatic usually, or an assembly. At this point, we're actually working with assemblies, which I really appreciate, because then you already see some color. You see where this is going. You always have the vocals of the actors, so that's a lot of times it's really inspiring and helpful because you get the pace and the tone and what we're going for, and this helps understand what the music should be. And so I tend to write from the beginning to the end, like a very traditional composer. Occasionally I'll do the big scene, like if there's a big climax scene, I'll do it first. Sometimes, like that depends.
Mhm.
But yeah, so it's, again, you send it for review, you get notes, or you don't get notes. Sometimes you get like compliments, which is great. And then you send it back. And then once everything is ready, it goes to orchestration. And then it goes to the orchestra. And then we have a scoring session that's remote. And we get the files back. We do the score mix. Then we go to the dub, like there's a dub session, and then you watch the final playback, and if you have changes, then you make them, and then it's done, and then it airs on Paramount, and then your parents see it, and they love it. My parents are my biggest fans, so
Oh.
yeah, that's very cute.
You said that when you originally watched Star Trek that you were always a fan of the music, but not always a fan of the franchise because you didn't
Oh
understand it since
yeah,
you speak English.
yeah,
What
that's true.
what in your mind makes a good score where even someone who potentially didn't speak English could still understand characters and plots and the general feeling of something?
Yeah, that's true. I mean, it's yeah, because you can still, I think the music, especially in animation, but also in general in films, like a lot of times it will reflect the feeling that you're supposed to feel, or like the whether it's a contemplative thing, or like a, hey, decide for yourself, but like there's something that provokes an emotion, and sometimes, again, sometimes the audience will decide what the emotion is. And actually that's interesting when there's no translation or no subtitles, and then you're like, what am I, it's that is when you really, the music can dictate like your emotion, and that's interesting. I never thought of that, but yeah, I mean, as a kid, I'm sure you watched like animations that you didn't understand, like maybe some Japanese stuff, or and yeah, I mean, it really informs the story. It helps drive it forward, and it helps drive the character. Like if the character has some trombones, and like, I don't know, it's a like jazzy thing, that maybe this guy is actually funny, or and if this is a horns, then maybe this character is heroic. Like there's some instruments that inform your thought about what this is, maybe, so there's like a whole range that you could do with instrumentation and with melody. Like when you hear the Darth Vader tone, like that this is the motif of, like, this guy's not good news, so. Or when you see Dreadnought, really, or in our show, like the Diviner, like it's clearly, the Dreadnought is definitely not good news. The Diviner, you have a threatening tone, but there's also some sort of a choir thing there, and like a bit of a religious feel to even from the first episode. And then by episode 10 you realize, oh, okay, well, this guy has a backstory and his mission is almost religious, and says he's trying to like save his people. He's saying, oh, Starfleet destroyed my world. I mean, I'm allowed to say that because it's already out there, so it is spoilers though, so you might want to put like a spoiler alert. But yeah, so I knew this from the get-go because I read the script, so I knew that where this was going. And when we talked about his character in episode 1, it was already about like, okay, he's not entirely evil. I mean, he is evil, he's the villain, but you know, in the second part, like we'll see that he's not, like that he has a reason, and that's, you know, maybe that will change. So, you know, we don't want to make him fully like there has to be more layers of, he's not just Darth Vader, you know, like let's, you know, or he's not a bad, like just a bad guy. I mean, yeah, Darth Vader all the time. Sort of, okay, I'm complicating things. He's not just a bad guy.
Well, what's it like working on a second season of something after already finishing the first season? And
well, yeah, technically it's the same season because we have 20 episodes, but we can say that it's the first half of it. Yeah, I mean, yeah, time has passed, so it is going to be reflected in the score, because so I think what we're going for in this part of the season would be like a little less animated, a little more feel of live action, if that makes sense. A little more adult, like a little more growth, and so the themes are still the same themes, the motifs are still the same motifs, but they're going to be used a little differently, and with variations, and with different you know, with different instrumentation maybe, and then there's like new themes coming in for new characters. So you've got that developing. That's what I love about like big arc stuff. You can really play with, you know, the protostar theme is not exactly like, you know, now that we have learned that there's, you know, some kind of a weapon on the ship, like what is that, like what you know, so you know, it's you know, we'll get to see that, but like the theme of the ship is not entirely now like all bright and like hopeful, it's also mysterious. So yeah, I mean, you'll watch and see.
okay. And now obviously,
wait, the weapon thing is on episode 10, right? I think so.
yeah, I think it is. Yeah.
He thinks, yeah, okay. I don't want to like
I'll put spoiler warnings in the subject.
Oh, okay.
And now obviously you said you are the composer for Star Trek Strange New Worlds, which it says on IMDb that it's in post-production. Is there anything you can tell us about what we can look forward to when it comes to your score for this?
Yeah, I just finished recording it actually. On Sunday was our last session for the season, and we're coming back to score it the second season in the end of June. So that's very close. That score has, it's been a lot of fun. Like it has a lot of callbacks to the original series. And I had a lot of good time to do it because I love the original series and I love the score in particular. So it was really fun to come back to that. There are also callbacks to the original theme, the Alexander Courage theme. I was going for like an older sound, like and a very, it's, again, this is an active score, like it's very dynamic, it's very moving. It's pretty melodic, like there's motifs and stuff. It's very like, in a sense, it's a little different than Discovery and Picard, or like it's just very, very active. You'll see, it's more like Prodigy, if that makes sense. Mm-hmm. Which I like, you know, I think that's what we were going for because they hired me to do that. So yeah, and what else can I say about the score? It's recorded at Warner Brothers, and we had a smaller orchestra actually. Like for Prodigy, we have like 55 musicians, and this one we have 37. But it still works. And they sound really, really big. So yeah, I'm excited. I'm really excited for the world to see it because I think people are gonna enjoy this kind of score. And the show itself. Like I love the show and I love the new characters, and I love that it's episodic and not like a bingeable story. I mean, don't get me wrong, I can't wait for the next Picard to drop. Like I'm very, very much a Trekkie. And I'll take any track that comes, into the screen. But I do appreciate when it's not a binge scenario, because I don't want to wait for next week. I mean, I will wait for next week, but I want the story to end. Like I want, as an old school Trekkie, I'm like, I love it when like in TNG you have this like mystery and then it resolves. And then, next week you have another mystery. And yes, there's an overall line, but it's not like, it's not something I have to binge like overnight.
Yeah.
Yeah, because I'll still binge it overnight, but yeah, but it does have like all these moral dilemmas and all this like, I feel the core of Trek is really very much in this show, which, for me is great. Like I appreciate that.
Moving shows now, The Woman in the House Across the Street from the
From
Girl.
the girl in the window.
Yes, I will be referring to this as this show so that I don't say that title a million times. But
Okay, sure.
I feel that the score for this show is a vital element in bringing the story of it alive. And everything fits so well, and it just sounds like so perfect to like the overall feeling of it. How do
Oh,
you
thank
match
you.
the score so perfectly for every moment? Like, how do you go about this?
Well, I think it comes with experience, I guess, like, and trial and error a lot. Like, you're like, okay, well, what am I going to do here? And like, what feel should, like, a lot of times I'll try a certain tempo, for example, and then I'll be like, oh, maybe, what if I made this like 10 BPM faster? BPM is bits per minute. I mean, you know that, but like your audience. So, uh, so you want, you want to try things out, and you're like, what if the cello played this, or what if, and sometimes I'll just experiment stuff, and sometimes I'll throw a certain cue on another scene. I'm like, oh, this really doesn't work, or stuff like that. So and then there was the filmmakers on this one. They were very, very particular and very like, very helpful in informing what I should, consider doing, and like what we should. There was a lot of back and forth on that too, especially that montage where she's fixing the chair and she's like I call it the motivation montage. So we had several versions on that, because I was like, well, do they really want to go for it, for like super excited, like happy, hopeful, and they did, like they were like pushing for more and more excitement, and I'm like, okay, cool. So yeah, a lot of the score decisions were made by like, it was like a mutual decision of like, and I was sometimes surprised that they're like saying, yeah, we want this to go super straight, like this is straight up like romantic, this is the most romantic, like your romantic comedy, let's go for it, and then they drop the casserole dish. It's just because when you're really when your score really kind of commits to that genre, like the genre of the moment, because that show goes through like a million genres at the same time. Like when she had sex with this like intruder guy, and it's also the romantic, like, oh, you didn't see that coming, you're like, oh well, I thought, but then all of a sudden he's like the sweetest boy who makes pancakes. So it's like, and the score supports that. So I like that decision, of playing it straight.
Mhm.
Yeah.
And this show obviously takes on like satire. It has a lot of satire, and it seems to be poking fun at like stereotypes when it comes to certain genres. So how
Yeah.
does this affect your choices for the score?
So it's basically those genres, whatever they are, you want it to be in line with them. So if it's a horror moment, you really want to do that horror moment as horror as it gets. Oh, there's a hidden house guest like in the attic, like there's something in the attic, so you want to go for it. And then she goes to the attic and you're like, oh well, I guess I'm just imagining it, and it's like, no, you're not. Like, what? And she goes to drink. And so I think the commitment of the music to going with what she's feeling and what she's like, and then all of a sudden she's like in a different zone in her life, a different space. And it's like, oh, now she's spying on this guy, like, who's really handsome, her neighbor up, on the other side of the street. So now it's like a sexy little, like, oh, like a passionate cue, like a so it changes very quickly. And this is what I'm saying, that like a range is very important when you're coming to score, to film scoring in general. Because here's an example for one project that asks you to write like a million different styles in one thing. You have thriller, you have horror, you have comedy, you have romance, you have drama, like all those moments where, you know, she's remembering her daughter, and everything shifts very quickly too. So you got to be able to do that and still stay within the same themes and the same, you know, recurring ideas. And you know, that's where variations come in very handy, because you still want it to be what's that called, like you want it to feel cohesive within all these genres. So that to me was the most challenge there, because you still want to keep the same instrumentation somehow, but create different genres and different, like, you know, inside that same score. We were listening to the album, by the way. That's coming up pretty soon.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And what was it like? You talked about this on your website a bit. What was it like collaborating with the showrunners?
Oh man, they're so awesome. They are like, so all the dark humor that you have on screen, like there's a lot of it outside of the screen, which I really appreciate. Like I feel, again, humor is a key to, you know, to have fun collaborators. So I think we really understood each other very well, and they were very accessible too, which is very helpful. You know, because some showrunners are like so busy and they don't have time and stuff. But like, yeah, and I love it when filmmakers really care about the score. Like they take the time to review it and debate it and think about it. And sometimes we would have like discussions where some of the filmmakers would be like, want one thing, and then the other one wants this thing, and it's like, but ultimately we all arrive to good decisions, I think. And it was nice to see also how they you know, what their arguments are and what my arguments are. And you know, you kind of want to choose your fights too. Fights, not really fights, but you know, where you're like, okay, well, you know, I'm just gonna do what they are asking me. You know, that kind of stuff. Ultimately, it's their story, and you want to tell it. You want to help tell it. And you want to do the best job you can. So yeah, but they're really fun. They're fun people. And they've done a lot of things that I like. So, you know, just sometimes being able to work with all these like creative, they're so, you know, they're very inspiring.
Mm-hmm. And when it comes to this show, how is it like working with narration versus dialogue? How does that affect the score? Because I know that Kristen is narrating, as she does a lot in this show, versus conversation she has or a brief interaction with someone. How does that affect the score?
Wait, you know what? That's a good question. I've never been asked that, so that's good. But also like I never thought about that. Wow. I guess it's intuitive that you want to kind of like have a feel of like a montage feel over voiceover stuff, and I think I just did it intuitively. I don't think that it was you know, an actual conscious decision. It just calls for it, you know. You always want to do what the scene, you know, what the scene calls for, and in that case, you know, you kind of want to let the audience feel the dialogue and feel the, like, you know, sorry, feel her dialogue, like her, what's that called, voiceover. So you don't want to, like, you know, you don't want to be in the way of stuff like that. In general, you don't want to be in the way of dialogue, right? So yeah, but that's interesting. That's really interesting. Do
Do you have any favorite memories from working on this show?
I actually loved our playbacks, because that was really fun to see the final picture and the final sound, because the sound, you know, the sound is very important in this show. Like there's so much, like, you know, all the casserole dishes falling, like all that stuff is so, like, it makes it really, really spicy. And I felt, you know, and they changed some of the dialogue, you know, from what I worked on to the final version. And the color, like everything, it was really fun to just, you know, we did that on also remote, because COVID and stuff. And I think only the filmmakers went to actually, they actually went to the stage, to the sound stage. But it was just fun to see how everything comes together. So I think that was, and also working on that scene with Rex was really fun.
Mhm.
The bread, when they're texting, that was really fun. I think it was probably my favorite.
Well, the score was absolutely amazing. I'll move on to an American Pickle now. You talked about that earlier, about how much you enjoyed that process. What was it like working on the score for that?
Oh man, I mean, that was my dream coming true, literally, because you know, that was the one thing I wanted to do, like be in Hollywood, work on a big film, you know, and the Seth Rogen, like he's, you know, I've always loved his stuff, and this one was like, you know, I think for him, and not a very typical film, because he's normally doing all these weird comedies, and all of a sudden he's is doing something that is so emotional and so relating to his Jewish identity. And for me, like, so that was very big too. And he's very, really, his acting skills on that are showing up. Like, he's really good as Herschel. I'm like, wow. And so, yeah, it was the perfect project because it's a comedy, which I love. I love comedy. That's my favorite genre. And then you have like this dramatic stuff, and then you have the Jewish stuff too, which is a good angle for me. And then as a millennial, I actually identify with Ben a little bit, like the character of Ben, the grandkid, because he's a secular guy. He doesn't, he doesn't go to the shul. He doesn't do the Jewish stuff. And I feel the same. Like, I grew up growing up in Israel, and as a secular, I don't go to shul, like, but moving to the US, I actually miss that Jewish element, like, now, because I'm like, in Israel, everyone celebrates Yom Kippur, like, everyone observes it, like, no cars in the street. It's very, like, it's a quiet day. It's like a day of prayer or whatever. And here, it's like a regular day for everyone. I'm like, this is weird for me a little bit. So just like that feeling. So I identify with both characters because he's slowly going back into his roots. He's actually accepting himself as a Jew. And like, so I like that, like, from both characters. So I could relate to them. So it was really fun to write for. And then the whole collaboration with Michael was like, as he was one of my heroes too. And I mean, he still is. But when I grew up, I listened to a lot of his scores, like, all the Pixar stuff, and then the Star Trek. And it was like, it was a dream come true. Like, I never expected, not in a million years, that I will be working with Michael. And then, yeah, just his guidance, and like, the way that he's looking at picture was very different than the way I did. And so I learned a lot about, like, how to do picture, like how to, because for example, I wrote this thing, I wrote this sequence, and then he was like, well, this is great for the end titles. We should put, this is too happy for what we have here. This should just be like, let's do something a little less, and so I did, and that was obviously the right decision. But also, like, little stuff like, hey, what if we change this and that and start this a little earlier, and that will make the scene, that will feed the perspective a little more, like the perspective of the character. And I'm like, this is brilliant. I should have thought about that, and then there was a whole team aspect that I never worked with a team. I was part of other teams, but I never had my own team. And then just seeing how Michael, like, works with other people, and like how to even, like, all of that stuff was very helpful to understand what I want to do and what I want to be like. Because there's like a lot of other composers in town who are not like good examples to what I want to be like and how I want to be part of my own team, like, so I like that, like, it's a team effort at Michael's place too. Like, it's, he respects everyone, and he's just so inspiring. He's really inspiring, and he's a great man. I like, just really a lot of humor, a lot of fun, a lot of there's no dull moment with Michael.
And you talked earlier about relating to the character. How does your relation to a character impact the score when you're writing it?
Well, obviously you want to identify as much as you can. You want to find like some points of like connection, because it will be easier to write. It will be easier to understand the mindset of this character and where she is or he is, or they are. Like, you want to capture the essence of the story. Like, that would help the story. If the music is, something that fits the character, it will feel more cohesive to the film, and the filmmakers will be happy, and you'll be happy, and everyone will be happy. So you want to relate, and you want to feel like you also, this is also from a perspective of, if it's 3 a.m. and you still have to write, you really want to do something that you relate with. Because if you don't relate with what you're doing, then you're not going to have the motivation to do it. And so I do think it's important to find something that you have in common with the character, or with the show or with the film or whatever it is. Like, that's why it's so easy for me to write Star Trek, because I just like, I'm so excited about it. I identify with it like completely. And I love the character, like it's just so relatable. And yeah, same with Herschel, same with that like short, the Disney short thing, you know. I'm like, okay, what does the little raccoon feel? Okay, the little raccoon is me. I feel like that, like I'm excited, I want to explore, I want to do everything, I want to like I want to go everywhere, I want to try things. And the other raccoon is like the mom or the dad, they're like, oh, you need to be careful. And I'm like, oh, this is how I feel about my nephews. Like they need to be careful, like I need to guard them. And you know, or my cat, really, like, you know, I'm like, you know, I mean, I need to make sure he's not, you know, doing stuff that he shouldn't be doing, like, so you can find a way to relate, really.
Perfect transition into Disney's Far from the Tree. What was it like working on that?
Oh, it was fun. I felt like the raccoon, and I felt like the music, like the director and the music supervisor, like everyone was like trying to like Nami be safe. No, but it was really fun. I think our most informed like decision on that was not to have trombones. I remember that as a conversation, like no trumpets, no trombones. Because I, you know, it's interesting. It was an interesting color choice. But it was really fun to do that, because again, this was something that you start on like an animatic and not in like a full animation. And there was no dialogue in this at all because it's raccoons. So there was, you know, a little bit of like scratch sounds of raccoons, but like that's pretty much it. But I love how the director, Natalie Nurga, like her animation captured the feeling, like even without my music. Like it was so interesting to see, like it works. It was just so beautiful. The very initial, you know, you know, screening that they did, like when I watched it in the interview first time, like it was just so perfect already. And I'm like, oh, she's just so talented. And then I thought, how am I going to make this better? I mean, this is already great. Like, and they used the Tom Newman temp music, which I'm like, this is the best. You know, it was, I think, Finding Nemo, like stuff like that. It was so good. I'm like, you don't need me. But they didn't. I mean, they didn't have a score, so they didn't need me. Yeah, it was a little bit of a challenge. Like, I mean, the middle section was a little bit of a challenge because we needed to find a tone that is kind of reflecting the mom's trauma. So I'm talking about the second part of the movie, like the beginning of it, when the mom or the dad, like it's unclear, but we called her Marie. So she brings her little kid to the beach again.
Yeah.
And for her, she's like dealing with that trauma that she had when she was a kid. But she also, you know, she needs to make sure that the kid is okay. But she doesn't want to repeat the mistakes of her parents.
Yeah.
So that moment, like those 30 seconds were a little tricky. Everything else was like very, very smooth in terms of scoring. But for that, I think we did a few revisions until I figured out what to do, because it had to be a little bit more natural, like not leaning towards anything, because if you lean a little bit too much into the trauma, it doesn't work. And if you lean a little bit much into the excitement of the little new raccoon, it doesn't work. So it was a little bit of a back and forth. But yeah, it was you know, recorded that also at Warner Brothers. Yeah, and I'm really happy with how it all came out. And you know, I cry every time I watch this film. Yeah. And I watched it with my parents, and they also like it. It was very emotional. I think it was emotional for like everyone who watched it. I think it's so relatable. Again, like, you know, we all have parents. We all have, you know, a lot of us have kids or are familiar with what kids are, or like, you know, I mean, my sister has kids, so like I'm not there yet. We'll get there. But yeah.
Last question for you before I move into like a couple last questions.
Okay.
What's it like working on a documentary with like real people's stories versus working on like a fiction story or like science fiction story?
Oh, in a way, it's harder emotionally. It's weird. The first, you know, big project I did, like when I was 23 or 22, was a documentary, and that was about not an exciting, like a very sad event, like so there was a terror attack in Burgas in Europe, and this was about one of the victims, like one of the men who died there, and his family, and how they, you know, how they got the news and how they move on. And you know, it was really difficult, and about his life. It was kind of like celebrating his life. But we had the premiere, and then they came, like the family and like like all of his friends, and it was just so real, because I've seen their faces in the interviews in the movie, and then all of a sudden it becomes real, and you're like, wow, like this is really hard. It hits you hard. So yeah, no, obviously not all documentaries are sad and like
Mhm.
and so emotionally like sad, but like there is this element of like, okay, these people are real people, like, and this, when you meet them after, oftentimes you'll see them at the premiere, or you'll not see them at a premiere, but it's you know I think it's the approach in terms of scoring is a little less active. Like you kind of want to let things be. A lot of times you'll play a natural thing, or like maybe a little bit of hope, maybe a little bit of sad, but like a lot of times it'll be a contemplative thing, or like something that allows people to get to their own conclusion. And a lot of documentaries want you to be natural in what you're doing, or maybe a little bit go with like, I did a documentary called Church and State, and that was about like the fight for gay marriage in Utah, like LGBT marriage in Utah. This was before the court ruling in 2013, and so they showed the side of the church and the Mormon stuff and all that history. So when they show the historic thing about the Mormons, then you could go a little bit more like, a conservative feel, or something that like feels more like a religious music, maybe an organ, or like bells of a church, or like, you can include stuff. And then when you go to the other stuff, you want that to feel more like there's a drive of the trials, like all the the legal process. So you want to have a beat, you want to have a pull, so it kind of kind of help the feeling of anxiety that like these couples were experiencing, that they couldn't get married, and then will the court ruling allow it or not. Like it was all very like, so you wanted to capture that feeling of like, and the gravity of the moment too. So yeah, I mean, but you still, everything is a little tamed down, I have to say. Like you don't score moments, it's more like an overall arc of a scene. It's not like, oh, there's like sometimes there'll be a climax, but like it won't be like animation or anything like that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Couple last concluding questions for you. You
Okay.
talked earlier about writer's block. Do you have any advice as writer's block?
I don't like giving advice, because I feel like everyone has their own set of circumstances, but I can give Rafi's advice to me, like my teacher, and he was like, go for it anyway. Like try to do something, just throw yourself at the piano or wherever you are, and just try it again and try it again, and maybe take a break, go for a walk, go for like, but don't give yourself up on this. Like the next day or whatever, you go back and you just do it, and maybe you'll use this for something else, maybe something else will come, or for that piece that you just, this improvisation that you just came. But if you don't like really go for it, then it's not going to get written, and then you're going to go into this loop of like, oh my god, I'm not a good writer. I mean, it happens to me a lot. Like I'm like, oh shit, I have no idea what to do this. I don't know how to do this scene. Like, what am I doing here? What am I doing? But until I don't, like, ultimately I have to, like, I have to do it. Like there's just deadline.
Yeah.
So
One of my favorite questions, and I ask this to everyone because it's like my favorite question. If you could give your past self a piece of advice, what would it be?
uh wow, this is a good one. Um Invest in Tesla. No, I'm kidding. I don't know, because I like where I am right now, and I wouldn't want things to change. I mean, and this is in terms of career, in terms of everything, because if anything that you do, I mean, according to Star Trek, everything that you give you change in the past would lead to different outcome in the future, and I like where I am. So I don't know, I'd say like stick to what you're doing. Like it's gonna work out, everything's gonna work out, and it does work out. Yeah.
That's great advice.
Yeah.
Can you tell us about any projects you're currently working on or anything you have coming up?
Well, I have the next season of Prodigy coming up, but that's the only project I can actually talk about. Sorry.
That's perfect.
Yeah, there's more things in the pipeline, but like like some of them have not been like announced, or I just can't really like, yeah. But it's exciting, and I'm very excited for season 2 of Strange New Worlds too, because that's already filming, and I read some of the scripts, and I'm like so excited. I'm very excited. Yeah, I can't wait for it to air, really.
Well, I'm so excited to see everything you have come up, and thank you so much for answering all my questions.
Yeah, thank you. This was really fun, and you had like really great questions too. Like I've done a lot of interviews, but your questions were like a lot of them were unique. So it made me think. I have to think.
Thank you so much. That means so much.
Yeah, yeah. Well, thank you.